Post-Rome. We'll see how much we can get through this, but the topic is asking me to go from the Germanics, Christianity, the Byzantine, all the way to the Kievan Rus, which is supposed to be basically the start of Russia. Here is a map of many of the German tribes that have kind of come about and taken over much of the western, if you will, portions of the Roman Empire. And of course, you also see some Byzantine Empire as well, and the Safavids. Hang on a second. In this green portion here, neighboring, if you will, the Eastern Roman Empire. So we look at the Germanic tribes. Now, what possibly pushed the Germanic tribes to go down to where the Romans were? There's some argument that probably it was because of Attila and other, if you will, members of the Huns. They may well have come down to avoid those fellas. And Rome is in probably the worst condition it can be in. One thing is, remember, Constantine really weakens the Roman Empire, at least the western portion of the Roman Empire, by moving the capital of his empire to, if you will, Byzantium, which will become Constantinople, and eventually today will be known as Istanbul. So it's a weaker, if you will, kingdom, weaker, if you will, empire, this Western Empire. Now they tried to do a number of things to appease these people. Among them was, they tried, if you will, join forces, ally with the tribes, kind of be partners. Didn't work. And by 410, the Visigoths, if you will take the Romans out. Now, while they conquer the Romans, they also take quite a bit from them. They actually do a great deal of cultural borrowing. Many of them learn Latin. Many of them become Christians. Now, there will be a question of what type of Christian they will be, and we'll talk about this here. But nevertheless, they indeed adopted a number of the Roman ways. Now, when we talk, I suppose, about a number of these tribes, the Goths, Visigoths, Orthogoths, so on and so forth, one of them to keep in mind are the Franks. We're going to first start, if you will, with the Moravian dynasty of Franks. They're led by a very ambitious king, King Clovis, who has great, if you will, design to expand beyond where France is. And of course, there really isn't a France at this time. I guess it would be the Frankish, if you will, kingdom. I guess the Franks are probably going to be in this area right here. And we know his relationship with Clotilde will be influential in regards to spreading, if you will, Christianity through his kingdom and a little bit beyond. Now, it does appear that among the Moravians, probably King Clovis is the most competent of these. We believe that basically this dynasty will fall into despair, because his successors just weren't as good, of a ruler as he was. And they will fall to another group of Franks known as the Carolingians. And we will be talking, I think we'll be talking about them. I'm trying to remember if I do it in this one or if I do it, if you will, as we start off the Middle Ages. I think the Middle Ages. All right. Well, like I said, the Germanics at one time were pagans. And some will remain pagans for a while. But a number of them will Romanize. The Ostrogoths under Theodoric, if you will, do Romanize. You know, these are Germanics, but they do, if you will, Romanize. Um, you have about a 33-year rule, as you can see here. Now, I'll also say that the Ostrogoths were indeed Arian Christians. Now, I'm trying to remember if we talked about this. Arian Christians are essentially Christians who do not accept the Christian God, just do not accept the divinity of Jesus, at least not in regards to the Trinity. And the Council of Nicaea, if you will, settles this. The Council of Nicaea is always interesting because you'll get a lot of folks on the internet who will tell you that they know all about it, and that it, if you will, creates, Jesus, out of whole cloth. Well, it doesn't do anything like that. Rather, what it does is determine what path forth to go with Christianity. Should we accept, if you will, the Trinity, or, if you will, should we accept, if you will, the message of Arius, who basically says that Jesus is not really a divine figure? Well, they are Arian Christians, but they are tolerant, if you will, of this form of Roman Christianity that accepts a Trinity. Now, in the Ostrogoths, if you will, after 526, Theodoric's daughter, Amalsuentia, will succeed her father. However, there are ambitions. And because of these ambitions from others, she dies. She's killed, if you will, not long after. So once again, you have this idea of political murder. Once again, remember, that's a very important theme you need to keep in mind about. We're having a lot of, if you will, political murder, in a number, if you will, of civilizations at this time, large stretch of time. Now, the Lombards, if you will replace, if you will, the Ostrogoths in the area, and will stay there from about 568 in the Common Era until about the 700s. Now, we also know that the Visigoths didn't stay in Rome long. The Visigoths took over, Rome, but then leave for Spain by about 418. So they didn't stay for very long. But these Visigoths, while leaving basically, at least the city of Rome, will convert to Roman Christianity. Now, we also know that they will persecute, if you will, Jews to a large extent, if you will, in the area. So that's not good news for Jews. By about 711, the Moors come in, and they, if you will, conquer, if you will, the Jews. Excuse me, I'm sorry, not the Jews, but rather the Visigoths. Hang on a second here. So as we look at the Moors, almost assuredly the Moors are a North African group. And it's really hard to tell what the Moors probably looked like. They could have been an olive color. Who knows? Maybe some may have resembled sub-Saharan blacks. But nevertheless, they come in and they, if you will, invade Spain. Now, you'll also notice that there's a group named the Vandals. Well, the Vandals were Germanics who came down into Africa. So there's a lot of intermingling, and interracial, if you want to call it that, intermingling in the area. All right, so let's go into Rome and the Catholic Empire. Rome and the Catholic Empire. All righty, well, out of this vacuum, we see a number of bishops coming, around this Roman Empire. This is now an empire. This main project may be Catholicism. And we're seeing quite a few bishops coming, if you will, into this area, and they're amassing enormous clerical and secular power, particularly the ones in the city of Rome. Well, these bishops start to get the idea that since Rome is the center of the Catholic Empire, shouldn't the Bishop of Rome be the center of the Catholic Church? And so indeed, they give a new term, if you will, for the Bishop of Rome, a father, if you will, Pope. And so we see the establishment of the Pope. And that indeed the Pope, they say there's biblical sanction for the Pope, based on this idea of Jesus saying to Peter, here's where you're going to be my rock. And the Pope lies, if you will, not lies, but Pope's power lies within the Petrine doctrine. There's a corruption of the word Peter. Petrine, petroleum, petrified, all things having to do with rocks, right? Petrified, to be scared, sealed as if a rock. Petroleum, fossil fuels that come from rocks. Well, because Peter is the head of the church, basically the Pope is from the line of Peter. And a number of these popes will once again will exude power that is beyond clerical power. Thanks to Pope Leo I, he is able to have diplomacy with the Vandals and the Huns so that they do not take over, if you will, the area, what is left, if you will, of the Western Empire. What's left that remains. Pope Gregory the First will be a governor, though not named, certainly in power. He will administer land reform. So you'll see redistribution of land, a good deal of this land going to poor people. Infrastructure repair, like roads, for example. He's going to deal with the Lombards, so diplomacy. He's going to deal, if you will, with the Byzantines, diplomacy. We'll have established, if you will, monasteries in the area. Well, we're going to see monasteries in the area anyway. In outlying areas especially, but in the cities as well. So we're going to see those getting outside of Pope Gregory the First. Probably one of the more famous, if you will, missionaries is going to be St. Patrick, 390 to 461. Now, St. Patrick is not Irish, but rather Roman Britain. And he's going to have extremely difficult work in Ireland. They're capturing the guy all the time. But eventually, he's going to make great inroads in Ireland. And Pope Gregory, if you will, is going to pick up the mission in 597. Finally making Ireland a Catholic stronghold. A lot of times we often associate Ireland with Catholicism. Well, certainly you can credit St. Patrick with that. The Byzantine Empire. So once again, the Byzantine Empire is the western part, the eastern part of the Roman Empire. The eastern part of the Roman Empire. As you can tell on the Justinian, it expands a great deal. He came pretty close to combining them. But at any rate, it is the eastern part of the Roman Empire. It's the Eastern Roman Empire. Some scholars will tell you that basically it is the Roman Empire. That they had moved the capital, and so they moved from, if you will, Rome to Byzantium, but it is, if you will, the Roman Empire. That the Roman Empire survives in the East for a very long time afterward. So, the Roman Empire, well, they saw what happened to Rome, or at least heard about it. And even though Constantinople was a great distance from Rome, Theodosius thought it would be a good idea to protect Rome by erecting a wall, by building a wall, if you will. So that may sound familiar, given the times. He hoped to have, if you will, and just about all these emperors want to have isolation from the Germanic tribes. They do not want to be near them at all. They don't want to have diplomatic relations with them. They don't want to share culture with them. They don't want to have any interaction that could, if you will, metastasize, if you will, into the Germanics taking over Byzantium. And even they're in a dangerous location. I mean, given where they are, the Persians are right behind them, and that's an issue. And, then you have, if you will, some enemies to the north. This is an area that is more Greek friendly, and we're going to see, if you will, Constantinople and, if you will, the Byzantine Empire go down that route. It's a much more Greek-friendly location. They try to stick to their Latin roots as much as possible, but, given where they are, it was, it was evident. It was, what am I trying to say? It was destined to happen that, the Greek part will win out. All right. Well, that brings us now, certainly not to the first Byzantine emperor, but, perhaps among the greatest, if you will, definitely among the greatest, perhaps the greatest, Justinian. Justinian is the last of the so-called Latin emperors. So this is a Latin-speaking emperor. He'll succeed, if you will, Justin the First. Now, he marries a young woman by the name of Theodora. And there's all kinds of questions about Theodora, but we're going to probably stay away from those particular questions, at least for now. But we do know that Theodora was a very competent advisor, if you will, to Justinian. The Nika riots happened. People have a number of concerns in mind, economic concerns among others. And among others, not the only thing. But in addition to that, the Nika riots exert heavy casualties, so there's lots of deaths, injuries. It causes severe damage to Constantinople. And because of that, Theodora's like, hey, you know what? Don't play footsie with these people. Put them down harshly. Make examples of these people. And so the people who, if you will, instigated the Nika riot were dealt with severely. And Justinian felt so bad about it. And he wound up resurrecting this building right here on the Hagia Sophia. This was supposed to be his way of saying, I'm sorry. It was an important, if you will, Orthodox Christian token, symbol. Now, while saying that, you should be clearly familiar with these four things. What are those? Well, what will happen later is that this Byzantine Empire will succumb, if you will, to the Ottoman Empire, which was a Muslim empire. So you'll have minarets that will come about. If you were to call, to make a call to mosque, they'd make them from these minarets that you see here. So there were some changes that the Ottoman Empire would make, if you will, to this building. All right. Now we also know that Justinian will make a legal code. A legal code. Corpus Juris Civilis, which is Latin for the Justinian Code. Body of civil law. Okay? Body, right here, civil law. And by the way, understand that the letter J doesn't come up until perhaps the 12th or 13th century. So they're using, if you will, the I as if it would be, so what will eventually become a J. So anyway, the Justinian Code, which is a, by codification of a number of laws, whether it be criminal, civil, property law, so on and so forth. We see this coming out of Emperor Justinian's rule. As far as uniting or reuniting, if you will, the East and Western Empire, you are looking at the closest attempt to that. Justinian was a hair's breadth, if you will, from reuniting the East and the West, and then came a plague. This plague killed numerous amounts of people. Justinian was in bad shape as well. And because of that, his attempt at reuniting, if you will, the East and the West went for naught. I'm trying to remember. I believe Theodora may well have died, if you will, in this plague. Now, back to Constantinople. Constantinople, if you will, was a bustling metropolis, a city of trade, a port city, a transcontinental city. Portions of this city, if you will, are on most of the city is in Asia Minor, while a smaller fragment of it will be, if you will, in Europe. All right, hang on. We know, if you will, that there is an issue with income disparity, like in many, if you will, cities. But we do know that they also took great attempts at caring, if you will, for the poor, if you will, in Constantinople. So that's important, if you will, to keep in mind that there is an attempt at engineered care, feeding them, making sure they have housing. Oh, well, here we go again. Eunuchs. think we've already talked about them. Eunuchs are clearly castrated boys or men. Once again, let's put it this way. I should say that these eunuchs were, this idea was borrowed, if you will, from the Persians, more than likely. And generally, if they're going to make a eunuch, they're probably going to make the eunuch while this person's still a child. Won't be quite as traumatic. So, why do they have them? Basically the same reason why the Chinese do. They figure, well, no sexual ambition, no biological heir, and also at the same time, there's this level of trust, if you will, with these eunuchs. Because they're thinking, well, my goodness, if his ambition, below is gone, probably, the rest of them is not quite as ambitious. And once again, he also doesn't have any biological heir. Eunuchs had great social mobility. They could rise pretty well up in the ranks. And also, a number of these eunuchs, I'm not sure if this was the case in China, but seems to be the case in the Byzantine Empire, a number of them were gynecologists. Because they're thinking, well, my goodness, what is this guy going to do? Well, it definitely wasn't entertained in the West. The West tended to frown on something like this. But indeed, it was a vehicle of the East. All right. Well, just like in the Western Empire, emperors are indeed in charge of facilitating entertainment. Not saying that they didn't have gladiators, but it seemed like their entertainment of choice were chariot races. They seem to be more into that. And they have, if you will, a stadium that set many tens of thousands of people, known as the Hippodrome. Now, just to let you know, hippo meaning horse. So, hippopotamus, that, the hippopotamus is considered a river horse, even though, they didn't have any relationship to a horse, really. And so numerous races, if you will, were brought about in this hippodrome. There is another thing at hand as well. The military. The military organized into provinces. Each of these provinces were headed by military governors. Made it easier to deploy them, I suppose, at a moment's notice. We do know that a number of these folks were conscripted, drafted or forced, if you will, into service. They had a large standing army. This is to say an army that was close to a professional army, or, not necessarily a militia. I mean, they are there on the ready. This standing army relied on slavery. I believe the Navy did to some extent as well. And the Navy also has a weapon. See, most naval warfare during this time involved ramming a ship and maybe making it sink, or ramming it and perhaps boarding it and fighting that way. Well, these guys had a weapon known as, if you will, Greek fire. Greek fire was brought about in several ways. One way of this Greek fire, one way to do it was to put it in basic grenades. You would put it in, kind of an early version of the grenade. You throw it, yes, the thing shatters, and next thing you know, you set people on fire. Another way was to basically have kind of like a hose, if you will. And in this hose, you basically relinquish this hot, this combustible fluid, which would set people on fire. It was horrible. It basically was the nuclear weapon of its time. It wasn't a nuclear weapon per se, but it basically had the same, if you will, effect. Um, this Greek fire, horrendous, and so horrendous that the emperors know it was horrendous. And so what did they do? They kept this stuff secret. It's like, ain't nobody gonna learn jack about this because we don't want them to use it against us. And so they hid it, if you will. And basically, they wind up destroying it. We've tried to make recreations of what we think it was, but I'm not sure if we're 100% sure. All right, now the Byzantine Empire is going to have a new identity. First of all, things kind of forced on them anyway. One of them is the fact that they're in a Greek-speaking area. Asia Minor is a Greek-speaking area, and Greek replaced Latin as the official language. And then when we talk about Christianity, well, the Greek language and the Latin language basically drew a wedge between the two churches. In the Greek churches, you're basically going to have an Orthodox church that would be headed by a number of, well, I guess later on they're going to do the patriarchy, but I guess in this case the Byzantine emperor is the head of the church, and in the West you will have a pope, as we brought up before. One question will become as we look at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 is, what is the nature of God? Or Jesus? Is Jesus a man or is he a God? And the Council of Chalcedon basically said, it's a combination of the two. We believe he was a man, but we also believe he is divine as well. We start to have some issues regarding the Orthodox Church and, if you will, the Greek Church, the Roman Church. We see, if you will, Pope Gregory II and Leo III basically splitting heads. We have this idea of iconoclasm. Well, this is basically the Greeks destroying, if you will, icons. These were images of Christ and Mary and other people, I suppose, in the New Testament. And Leo winds up destroying, if you will, these icons. One thing leads to another among that iconoclasm, but other things too, where we're going to see active, if you will, separation. The Orthodox Church, in addition to iconoclasm, also dismisses the Petrine doctrine, which makes the Pope the Pope. And they wanted a patriarch system. They don't think that the Pope, they don't think that's, if you will, an accurate portrayal of Christianity. And in 1054, they will have a great schism, where, if you will, the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church are basically going to be cold, toward each other, cold toward each other. So we have a split, a long-standing split. Okay. A different breed of diplomacy. So we see the Byzantine Empire. We're going to see some changes there. But hang on a second. A different breed of diplomacy. So we know that the Byzantine are going to push toward the Danube River northward. This is mainly because of a number of different, if you will, groups. A number of these are Slavic groups the Croats, the Serbs, I don't know about the Avars. But because of those folks, they push up north. We know that the Bulgars, if you will follow the Scandinavians and Kiev. And we start to see a complicated diplomacy where we're trying to, get folks to be appeased to our wishes. And so we start to have the trademark Byzantine, where people say that someone's Byzantine in nature, or the relationship's Byzantine in nature. You have a complicated diplomacy that involves sometimes bribing, sometimes spying on people, sometimes flattering people into things, so you wind up heaving a lot of flattery and compliments in order, if you will, to achieve an objective from these people. And in some cases, just outright lying and deceiving. And there was also proselytizing, in other words, conversions. Such was the case with Emperor Michael, who ruled for 25 years. Emperor Michael tried to civilize, if you will, the Slavs. He tried to civilize the Slavs. Well, how is he going to pull this off? Well, enters in Cyril and Methodius. Methodius. One thing is get rid of the language barrier. Well, Cyril and Methodius tried, if you will, to speak with, if you will, these Slavs. But here was the problem. One of them was there was no written script. And so Cyril invents, if you will, a written script. And of course, we name it after him. It's called the Cyrillic alphabet. If you notice, actually, a good deal of this might look similar to Greek. Obviously, this not being similar, some of these backwardings and things of this nature, but, some of this does. Look at it. That looks like a delta, for example. Alpha, it looks like beta. At any rate. And so, if you will, there were attempts, if you will, at solving the language barrier. And they did with the Cyrillic alphabet. And as a result, Slavs convert to Orthodox Christianity. And so you have Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox. Basil II, if you will, tried to bribe Prince Vladimir, I believe, using a bribe. Tried to marry, if you will, a daughter, if you will, to Prince Vladimir to secure conversion. It failed, but the marriage, he didn't accept it, but they certainly tried. And they also noticed that obviously, when it comes to missionary endeavors and proselytizing, that they would have competitions, obviously, for converts. Obviously, the Catholics are going to be interested in the Poles. These are Polish people. The Croats, Croatians, Hungarians, and Bohemians. So, at any rate, that sums up, if you will, post-Rome. Hopefully, you all will have a relatively decent time with that. Okay, take care. Goodbye. Let me know if you need any help.